night will know, I told you there was a presence lurking inside the European Parliament. I didn't know who he was seeing or what he was doing, but yes, one Tony Blair was in the building, and of course that on the same day that I'd seen Sir Keir Starmer, that on the same day that John Major gave a speech in London brimful of negativity, and all of that 48 hours on from Jeremy Corbyn changing the Labour Party's position. I very much get the feeling that the big bosses in Brussels are working in collusion with the Remainers in the United Kingdom. That's what I think. But Tony Blair struck today perhaps a slightly different tone. He was there making a speech this afternoon saying it is possible for Europe to reform. He's urging European leaders to reform the EU so that the British people can, yes, you've guessed it, change their minds. And he says, if we get a comprehensive reform of immigration policy in particular, then our genuine underlying grievances will be addressed and Brexit can be averted via, a second referendum, this time on the final deal with the European Union. And Blair, also said that he thought Brexit posed real threats to Northern Ireland and the peace process. Let's listen to our former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, speaking in Brussels today.
Now, the one thing I'm absolutely certain of politically, I'm certain of this. Any compromise that involves us abiding by European rules, but outside of Europe, is never going to attract the British people. And you will find, if it happens, you will find a large number of British people, and this is the whole point, then divide into two camps. There'll be those that say, that's not good enough, we want a clean break. Yeah, okay, it's going to cause us damage, we'll just take the damage. But there's another group of people that will say, in that case, we might as well stay. And this is the problem. Because the European negotiators, they're trying to talk cars with the British government. Right? Now, the car can be this size or that size, it can have this attribute or that attribute, it can even be steering wheel on the left hand or the right hand. Every time the British negotiators turn up, they say, well, he will offer you a donkey. And the Europeans say, no, we're talking cars here. And they say, okay. So then they go away, and then they come back a few weeks later, and they say, but I tell you what, we found a really pretty donkey. It's not going to work. Right? So this is why the reform in Europe, in the end, it only really works, in my view, if it's for the British, if it's a reform for the whole of Europe with Britain staying. I think a reform in Europe that ends up with some sort of Britain half in, half out, I just don't think that's ever going to work.
Well, isn't it wonderful that Tony Blair's back fully in our public life telling us what we should and should not do? There's one way in which I have to say that I do rather agree with him. He's basically arguing we have to be fully in or fully out. And do you know what? Bravo to that, as far as I'm concerned, because the idea that we are, Jacob Rees-Mogg called us a vassal state if we go into this period, once Article 50 has run out, and there we are in some transition period, effectively as a rule taker, but with no say whatsoever. That's logical. However, what makes me laugh is Tony Blair talking about reform in the European Union, because, folks, I've heard it all before. Yes, I was there, sitting in the parliamentary chamber in 2005, when Tony Blair and the United Kingdom took over the rotating presidency of the European Union. And at the start of his 6-month term, he turned up in Brussels and he gave a speech at which he said he would, as temporary president of the Union, he would bring reform to the European Union, he would bring great incentives to small business, he was going to change the whole thing. And I did publicly say that if Blair could achieve these things, it would be remarkable. Well, at the end of 6 months, he'd achieved diddly squat. In fact, all he'd got was he'd given a massive concession of the British rebate away in return for some vague promise that the French might at some point have a look at reforming the agricultural policy. And guess what? Over a decade on, none of it ever happened. So I want to ask you, is the European Union capable of being reformed, as Mr. Blair suggests? And if it is, would we then change our minds? So if you think the EU is capable of big reform, of making concessions, then call me on 0345 60 973 if, like me, you think it's for the birds, because actually what's really happening with Macron and the others is they're trying to integrate it even more deeply, even to build a European army, the very opposite of the reform that Blair's talking about. Then text to 84850, or maybe you've got a message for that nice Mr. Blair, in which case you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and we will, over the course of this next hour and the one after, keep you up to date with all the traffic and travel. We've had the beast from the east. It is now Storm Emma that is hitting South Wales and the west of this country. And of course, you can watch us on Facebook because we're live from Blackpool, where later on this evening I'll be on BBC's Question Time up against that arch Europhile Ken Clarke, and I'm looking forward to it very much indeed. So, can Brussels be reformed? Can it be reformed in a way that would make us change our minds, as Mr. Blair thinks we ought, in a second referendum? And I'm going to put that to Martin in New Cross. Good evening, Martin.
Evening, Nigel. How are you?
I'm very well. Yeah, I managed to get here from Brussels. No traffic problems, no snow up here in Blackpool, so I'm doing all right.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
Lucky you.
So
You want to be
is it snow? Is it still?
at the moment?
Is it still snowing in London? Is it?
No, it's just ice and slush, and it's awful.
Awful. Right, now talking of awful, Mr. Blair thinks that Brexit's awful, but it can all be sorted out, just like the weather maybe, it can all be sorted out with reform. Is that reform possible, Martin, in your view?
Absolutely not. The European Union, the whole purpose of the European Union is to create a great big superstate, a great big one-size-fits-all union, and you can't reform it. When we was having our referendum, if that wasn't enough of a warning to the European Union that we were prepared to leave if they didn't reform, and they still didn't reform. So you're just simply unreformable as an organisation.
Yes, I mean, when David Cameron went, and said to them, look, guys, unless you give me something, you never know, these mad, awful, horrible voters that I have in my country could possibly vote Brexit, and they didn't give him a thing, did they?
Absolutely not. And I have to say, as somebody who voted to leave, I absolutely love it when Lord Blair of Baghdad makes a great big statement, because more and more people just become leavers. So as far as I'm concerned, Tony Blair, who is absolutely toxic, actually radioactive on the doorstep, the more speeches he makes, the better.
Right, OK, Martin, I'm with you. Let's have more of Blair. Let's have more of Johnny Major, and then leaving becomes a bit more certain. Thank you. I'm going to go to Steve in Islington. Steve, good evening.
Hello, Nigel. I happen to think that if the facts change, if we have the opportunity to renegotiate new deals, I think we'd be foolish not to look at them. Loads of people change their mind. You've changed your mind in the past. Liam Fox has changed his mind. Daniel Hanna's changed his mind. Theresa May. So you've all been on record of saying that we should just go for a customs union rather than.
I've never, Steve.
Yeah,
Steve, I won't. Steve, I won't speak for the others.
No,
I've never, ever, ever.
They're wealthy and they're rich and they're happy. Come on,
Steve.
Nigel,
I've never, ever argued for us to be in a customs union. In fact, I was alone, literally alone in this country, arguing that the customs union was the trap that stopped us reaching out to the rest of the world and gave us expensive bras, shoes and food.
So you never at any point mentioned that Norway would be a good example, that Norway are doing well, that they are rich, that they have their own fish, they are happy.
I said that Norway has a much better situation than we've got, which they do, because they've got their fisheries, and they're able to make their own trade deals. But I did not want us to be Norway. I wanted us, Steve, to do better than that.
Well, you still use them as an example, and the fact of the matter is, if it's about Britain as a whole, and rather than just a few egos for a minority few politicians, then I think we'd be foolish not to look at what's on offer. I don't think we should just rule everything out.
All right, Steve, I take the premise, but actually, let me tell you, I was there with Franz Timmermans yesterday. I see Mr. Juncker regularly. I spoke and met with their chief negotiator, Barnier, just a few weeks ago, and their plan is to integrate the European Union even more deeply. So I put it to you, Steve, and you know, if they did come with a series of reforms, people may change their minds, or some may change their minds. But Steve, my point is, it ain't going to happen.
Integrated world now. This is what you are putting all the when you're talking about leaving and doing trade with the world, you're talking about an integrated world. Of course, we're all becoming more integrated.
Are they going to give us back powers, Steve?
Well, when you talk about what powers have we not been able to have? Can you tell me what
we
laws
can't
we've
catch
not
up?
been able to
We
use?
We can't even catch our own fish. We can't negotiate our own trade deals.
That's 1% of our GDP, and depending on.
Oh, right. Stuff the fishermen then, yeah?
Sorry?
Stuff the fishermen then, yeah?
Well, it's not stop the fishermen, but it's a very
Sounds
small
like it.
portion of our GDP to compare to the rest of the economy.
All right, fine. Steve, you know, fine. I understand the point, but I don't believe any reform is going to happen. In a moment, we're going to speak to Nick Ferrari because he's live at the Global Awards. He's out enjoying himself this evening, but for now, you're listening to the Nigel Farage Show. Mr. Blair wants a reformed European Union so that we can change our minds about Brexit in a second referendum. I think I've kind of heard it all before. I don't think the EU is capable of reform, but maybe you do. But first, a brand new event tonight, a big evening. It is the Global Awards, bringing together all of Global's radio stations, and that includes Capital, Capital Extra, Heart, Classic FM, Smooth, Radio X Gold, and of course LBC, to celebrate the biggest stars of music, news and entertainment at London's Eventim Apollo in Hammersmith. And there, joining us live, is LBC's own Nick Ferrari. Good evening, Nick.
Evening to you, Nigel.
So what is your role tonight, Nick? Are you giving out prizes or making speeches?
No, I tell you what, Nigel, you might have been with the president the other night. Well, at least I'm with a Spice Girl tonight. I am here with some of the with some of the other LBC. I'm sat between the fire commissioner and the assistant commissioner who runs the counter-terror brief. So it's quite a heavy table. We could do with someone like you to lighten the mood and watching the awards go through. The trouble is, Nigel, to be honest with you, as this is the first one, we're sort of feeling our way. Obviously, it's an awards night. There's going to be, as I just heard you say, you're right, there's awards in news, there's awards in music, there's awards in entertainment, and we'll find our way. But it comes right as the awards season kicks off. I don't know about you, you've probably been to some there where the television awards were last night. There's the British Press Awards later this month, and the Global's now seeking to establish itself right in the middle and front and centre.
Yeah, and I'm told there are going to be some very, very big names and big acts there this evening. And I've never thought of you, Nick, as being particularly a hipster or in touch with the up-to-date rock and pop scene.
What a shame!
I mean,
what a shame we're live. Otherwise, I'd tell you where you could put that thought, Nigel. Yes, we're going to have Andrea Bocelli and Kasabian, and I know you've got all their early work, Nigel, and you play it regularly when you drive to Brussels.
And Nick, but there are seriously some big names there tonight, aren't there? I mean, pop, contemporary.
Andrea Bocelli is a big name. Sam Smith is here as well. The stars of the same. You've got some big acts here.
Big acts. Have a great evening, and I've no doubt you'll be telling everybody on your breakfast show tomorrow from 7 o'clock. Nick, have
and I'll bring
fun.
you a bread roll. I'll bring you a bread roll back. Thanks, Nigel.
Thank you. It's very, very sweet of you. Thank you. Well, big ambitious night for Global, and I trust it's all going to go well. And Nick's sounding, I thought, on pretty good form, really. Quite how much he knows about the contemporary rock and pop scene, I would doubt, though I'd be no better, I have to tell you. So, is Mr. Blair right? Can this European Union now be reformed? And Roger says to me on Facebook, if the EU was serious about reform, they'd have made concessions to David Cameron in the run-up to the referendum, but they didn't. Rather than moving closer to its citizens, everything points to the EU becoming more centralised and remote. Remember Juncker's State of the Union address? Roger, I was there. I was literally feet from him. The lesson that Juncker, the lesson that Mr. Verhofstadt, the lesson that Barnier and Timmermans and all of them, their lesson from the British referendum is to centralise the EU even more deeply. As Verhofstadt keeps saying in the Parliament, what the citizens want is more Europe. They couldn't, in my view, be more wrong. But hey, let's see what Sean in Bexley, a new caller to this show, thinks. Sean, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. You all right?
Yeah, I'm all right, but I just, I wonder what Mr. Blair, had to drink at lunch to come out with this baloney. It can't be reformed, and they're not going to make concessions, Sean.
Well, I'm kind of wondering what you're drinking, because I actually believe, whether they reform or not, it doesn't affect us. I think a lot of what you've been saying over the years have been Euro myths, it's been scaremongering. I mean, if we take the Euro, Schengen, TTIP, everything that has been said about even Turkey joining the EU, nothing has materialised.
Do you know, Sean, you're quite right. When Nick Clegg said I was a dangerous fantasist in the LBC debate that incidentally Nick Farage chaired back in 2014, and Clegg said Farage is a dangerous fantasist, there will not be a European army. Guess what, Sean? It's going to be completed by 2025.
And guess what? We're not within that. So everything you're talking about, for example, you're talking about what's going on with other EU member states. We have a special relationship, okay? So we do not participate in a lot of things, like I've already mentioned with Schengen, for example. We have opt-out, so we have a different relationship. You're observing their relationship and getting scared, thinking that we are going to become part of that, but we never have.
But still, as EU members, they've had primacy of law. It's impossible for us at elections to change any piece of European legislation. We're banned from making our own trade deals across the world. I mean, you know, there's a long list, Sean, of things we're still signed up to. Look, the point is, Blair says if they make reforms, we might change our minds. But you would change your mind in a second referendum, you would vote for us to go back in, would you?
Well, absolutely. Well, I think it would be democratic for us to have a vote on the final deal regardless, with a Remain option there. But, I mean, you mentioned the law. I mean, when you were speaking to Femi last week, you mentioned about habeas corpus. And a Cambridge law professor has completely proved what you said wrong. So they
I tell you what, Sean, I don't know who he is, but I'll have a tenner with you that he's a Monet professor. I'll have a tenner with you that his department is funded by the European Commission, because I've seen this again and again and again. And Sean, I know people who in Spain and Greece have been chucked in prisons and left in there for a year without even having charges made against them. There is a fundamental difference between our common law and European law.
Okay, there is a section within the European Convention of Human Rights that states that you are presumed innocent until proven guilty by a court of law. Is that incorrect?
Yeah, and there's also sections within the Charter of Fundamental Rights, Article 52 from memory, that says that all of these rights can be removed if necessary. And that's the point about it. None of this European law gives the citizen the same degree of protections as we have with habeas corpus, trial by jury, and listen, Sean, we're going off piste here, I think, which perhaps is appropriate, given the amount of snow we got in this country. Sean, you're not bothered about reform. Fine, I take your point of view. You're a supporter of the EU, but I just wonder: is Blair right? Would we be more likely in a second referendum to vote to go back in if we got some reforms?
Okay, my answer to that is, if you are certain that we would not vote to go back in, then why not have the referendum? If you've got nothing to fear...
well, sure, we could have one every Thursday.
It's not about having one every Thursday, but it's basically saying we had one nearly 2 years ago. Now
they made the Danes vote again. They made the Irish vote again, and the establishment don't accept it. Sean, we'll see what happens. Thank you. Going to go to Dave in Fulham, another new caller to the show. Dave, good evening.
Hello, Nigel. How are you?
I am well, Dave, but I'm sort of laughing, really, at Blair, because I heard him say all this back in 2005. We're going to reform it. We're going to change it. And that was when he was at the height of his political powers. He completely failed to do so. And just the idea it's going to happen now, frankly, I think it's moonshine, Dave.
It is, because, I mean, they clearly are not interested in reform. They've had their chances. Blair's had his chance. John Major's had his chance. But I had the point I wanted to make, Nigel, is I think how it could have all been avoided in the first place is basically all of Eastern Europe, all the Eastern European countries were brought in a generation too early. They were still, developing their economies. They're just under the yoke of communism. They weren't ready for all this, and this is really what's happened. It's the immigration factor. Agree. And had they not come in, had they been brought in, phased in slowly and brought up to speed before they were allowed to join, we could have avoided this whole mess in the first place. You know, I work in the construction sector. I've seen what it's done. You know, I've been here 30 years, and I know what it was like before and after. And I can tell you, it's no good now. And this is why it's happening.
Dave, you're on the money. I remember in early 2004, there were 3 UKIP MEPs in the Parliament. And I'd always wanted us to leave the EU because I believed we should govern our own country. And there was a vote in the Parliament as to whether we should admit 8 former communist countries, many of whom, as you quite rightly say, Dave, had not made the full transition to being Western democracies. The government had said, don't worry your silly little heads. Blair had told us only an extra 13,000 would come a year. It was obvious to me what would happen if you said to people in poor countries, you can come to a relatively rich one. And we were the three, Dave, the 3 British MEPs alone that voted against them joining. And I said to my colleagues, that's the best day's work we'll ever do as MEPs. And that, Dave, ultimately, you're absolutely right. That is why we voted Brexit. I thank you for your call. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show. Tony Blair busy in Brussels today. He thinks if the EU reforms, we will change our minds over Brexit, rid ourselves of our genuine underlying grievances, and we'll avert Brexit in a second referendum. I do not believe any of that is possible, but that's our debate for this hour. But first, of course, we've had the beast from the east, and now it is Storm Emma coming in from the south, warm air meeting cold air, and apparently a red warning has now been issued for Wales and parts of the southwest of England. If any of you are confused about what these red and amber warnings mean, just go to lbc.co.uk. The definitions are there. But red basically means a risk to life and to property. Joining me now is Mike Hughes, LBC's Cardiff correspondent. Good evening, Mike.
Hello, Nigel. Very good evening. Yeah, you're absolutely right when you say, there is a danger to life. Those red warnings issued by the Met Office, they aren't taken very lightly. They aren't issued lightly at all. And this is the first time in quite some time now here in Wales that one of those weather warnings have been issued. And the fact of the matter is the situation here is getting steadily worse as the hours go on. We're probably at the height of that warning now. It's nothing short of blizzard conditions, if I'm honest. Strong winds, lots of snow. I've managed to hunker around a corner somewhere, but there is literally a wall of snow going past my face. Now, this red warning that's been issued by the Met Office will remain in place until around 2 a.m. Tomorrow morning, and temperatures plummeting here. The mercury's down to around about -3 as it stands, but with that wind chill, it really does feel like -10 at the moment.
Isn't there a danger, Mike, if we issue red warnings, that we finish up in a situation of cry wolf, that we do this and people start to think, hey, hang on, the Met Office, etc., are being somewhat over the top?
I would take that slightly cautiously, if I'm honest. As I mentioned right at the beginning, the Met Office don't really issue these warnings very lightly. As we've seen, the first one in many years was issued to Scotland overnight. The one here in Wales really did catch people off guard. It was around about 8:30 this morning when it was issued. So clearly, forecasters have been assessing the situation, tracking Storm Emma as she makes her way up from the south, and yes, very much this morning it was, well, we need to issue this warning because not only the winds, but the temperatures as well, Nigel. As I mentioned, it's absolutely freezing. There is serious concern for the likes of the homeless community in urbanised areas, certainly in Cardiff. Absolutely, people have really kind of heeded the warnings. I would say the roads are very quiet. Emergency services will certainly be pleased with that.
No, okay. And of course, this on the day when traditionally people in Wales wear their daffodils, don't they? Because today is St David's Day.
Absolutely, yes. It's normally a sea of yellow here.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, do your best to wish those people you do meet a very happy St David's Day from all of us, and thank you for the up-to-date and the briefing. And I think, the picture that Mike Hughes is giving us there from Cardiff is being repeated across the southwest. Similar situations in parts of Devon, Cornwall, huge problems coming out of Paddington Station. In fact, I think with the wind, it was actually snowing inside Paddington Station at some point this afternoon. So big impacts on train services. Let's go now to business. I'm joined now by Henrietta Grimston from Seven Investment. Good evening, Henrietta.
Good evening.
You've got some company news for us, I understand.
Carpet Right to start with, yes. So we've had a profit warning today from Carpet Right. They're expecting their full year results to come in actually with a pre-tax loss. Now, bearing in mind we're only on the 1st of March, this is the second profit warning that they have issued this year. Now, back in January, they had a revision of their profits for the year. They were expecting originally 14 million, so quite a healthy figure. And then they came out in January and said, oh, no, we think this is possibly going to be in the region of 2 to 4 million. And of course, now we're talking about a loss. Their shares shares have taken quite a big hit on the back of that news today, down at 23%, but actually over the last year they're down at 73%. Now the company are blaming weak consumer confidence having a big impact on their sales, but they're also saying that with less people moving house, of course that's having an impact on big ticket items. They of course sell carpets, hence the name of the company, but they do sell furniture as well. And we did see at the back end of last year other furniture retailers getting into difficulties. We saw some going into administration. So it's a similar picture that we've actually seen from other companies operating in this sector. Now they are in talks with their banks and other creditors to make sure that they don't get into difficulties on the loans that they have in place. They obviously don't want to breach any of their covenants, and they will be looking at other measures that they can put in place to try and sort of trim some of the fat around the edges on the business. That could include closing some of their stores. So we'll see what the company actually comes out with over the next few weeks and months.
Is this yet another story, Henrietta, of the high street in very serious decline?
Well, I mean, I think there is a question mark about whether businesses have future-proofed themselves. So we have definitely seen some businesses do better than others in terms of getting to grip with the online revolution. That's been particularly poignant with, I think, clothing retailers. We've seen some get it very right, some get it very wrong. I think with the big-ticket retailers like the furniture stores and, of course, sort of carpets and those sort of things, they're in a difficult position at the moment, more because of the fact that UK householders are in a sort of a squeeze situation at the moment when it comes to incomes, and we're just not going to spend our money on these big expensive items at the moment. So I think they're in a difficult situation because of what's going on more from an income perspective.
Yeah, try and give us some good news, Henrietta.
Well, let's go to the car insurance, or the insurance sector as a whole. So Hastings Insurance, they've had a very strong year, actually. So 39% increase in operating profits there to 184 million, 21% increase in net revenue, and also an improvement in their loss ratio. So that looks at the amount of money that they pay out compared on the amount they receive in premiums versus the claims. Now, of course, that probably does actually mean that we've paid more to them in terms of premiums. So I'm not sure if that was the good news that you're looking for. No. It's a similar picture that we've seen from Admiral and Direct Line, so a sort of a good news story across the insurance sector as a whole. Now, Hastings, of course, operate in a number of different insurance policy sectors, but car insurance has been particularly strong for them in the last year, and these results propel them actually to being the UK's now third largest car insurance provider. They do actually have a new CEO as of today, so you would think he would be starting from a very strong position, but actually all of these companies have said the next 12 months look to be quite challenging. Competition in the sector remains pretty high, and they're seeing a slowing in premium inflation. But actually I think that's pretty good news for all of us, because quite frankly I've seen my insurance premiums increase quite rapidly on my car insurance over the last few years, so if it's going to be a little bit cheaper for the next few years, I think that's a good thing.
Be no bad thing. And finally, Henrietta, how did the markets close today?
Well, the FTSE closed in the red, down 0.8% at 7176. The pound is actually a little bit weaker against the dollar at 137, and also a bit weaker against the euro at 112.5.
Tremendous. Thank you very much indeed. That was Henrietta Grimston from Seven Investment.
LBC Business Update
with Sage Business Cloud, helping you manage everything from money to people.
Well, we're going to go back to Exeter because we've got a correspondent there, Andy Ballantyne. And again, Andy, what's the position in Exeter this evening?
Well, the snow continues to fall here, but tragically in the last hour it's been confirmed that a 7-year-old girl has been killed in Cornwall after a weather-related incident. This is our first for Storm Emma. Up to half a metre of snow is expected to fall. Blizzard conditions in parts of the southwest. Now, police were called to Loo after reports that a car had hit a house. The girl, believed to be a pedestrian, died at the scene. Her next of kin have been informed. The seaside town has seen heavy snowfall this afternoon, and our police force has warned drivers not to travel with a number of roads in the area closed or impassable.
No, well, that's obviously grim news, Andy. And are they expecting a lot more snow?
Yeah, we're expecting up to 30 to 50 centimetres of snow. A number of roads have been closed, especially in Devon. The M5, we're hearing, is shut in certain places as well. The biggest problem, though, is that we've got high tides, and not only high tides, but later we're expecting freezing rain. So not nice down here at all.
No, not nice. Andy, thanks very much indeed for that report. Well, 30 to 50 centimetres of snow. In old money, that's well over a foot, isn't it? That's a lot of snow they're expecting in the southwest, and one tragic accident already. Well, I'm asking you this question about Tony Blair. Is he right? You know, is he right to think that the EU could be reformed and that maybe then we would change our minds? And funny enough, the Tony Blair Institute today for Global Change have conducted their own Facebook poll. They asked the question, which option do you want the government to choose? And 120,000 people have responded so far. And 70% have said, this is not scientific, but 70% have said they want to leave whatever the cost, while just 30% say they want to stay and rethink. And the poll is open for another 22 hours. The Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. If you want to take part in that poll, Google it, go to their website. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. Blair thinks the EU's reformable, and once it is, we'll have a second referendum and we'll all change our minds. Andy says on Twitter, instead of warning about the beast from the east, surely, Nigel, it should be beware the Blair or the danger of Major. Very good, Andy. Let's go to Mark in Southport, just down the road from where I am here in Blackpool. He's a new caller to the show. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Nigel. I'd just like to say, Nigel, I've had to lie to your people to get on the show and speak to you. I fully support and I thank you for everything you're doing for us Brexiteers. But I actually, to get on the show tonight, I had to say that I supported Blair and maybe the EU can be reformed, which I totally disbelieve it can be.
It's a bit naughty, Mark. It's a bit naughty, because, I mean, LBC is about straight talking. It is a bit naughty, but you've got through the net.
What I'm trying to say is, how come people who are supporting you can't get through to say thank you, Nigel, for everything you're doing?
Oh, no. Mark, you're very sweet. Thank you. And do you know something? Plenty of callers get through. And say that to me. But equally, the whole point, Mark, about LBC as a talk station is to allow all views to be expressed. And, you know, when it's my show, my job is to moderate. And I tell you something, Mark, I'm not shy in giving my opinion. You know, we had a caller on earlier on in the hour who said, don't worry about the fishermen. They're only 1% of our GDP. I said, well, what's that a message to say stuff the fishermen? So I'm not frightened of saying what I think. Mark, how positive or negative do you feel right now about Brexit happening?
Do you know what, Nigel? Towards last weekend, the weekend just gone, I was thinking that they're going to overturn the vote. They're trying the best. They're throwing everything at us they can. And like you said about that poll on Blair's Institute, I voted on that earlier on, and it was 66 to just like walk away. But
keep the faith, Mark. Keep the faith.
Hammering away, and they're going to win, aren't they? That's the way I'm seeing it. But I'm feeling a bit more positive now as the week's gone on. You know,
don't underestimate the will of ordinary people. And I have to say, Mark, also, I'm not so sure that Tony Blair and John Major actually carry that much weight with the public anymore. Mark, I thank you. Even if you are naughty, I thank you for your call. Thank you. Let's go to Connor, who's calling from Nunhead. Connor, good evening.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing well. So, is Blair right? Can it be reformed, despite all the evidence that would perhaps suggest the opposite?
Well, when the vote happened, I voted to remain, and that was my main thought process behind it, because I wasn't happy with everything the EU was doing, but I was like, you could reform it from the inside. But then, obviously, if you have a referendum, that's supposed to lead to direct action. Like, you can't do something and then not, because if you just go against it, like, we're in a really bad position. We're in a really bad position. Like, I think the government's going to fall apart very quickly, because now Labour can say that they're going to back a customs union, and if unless what Theresa May says tomorrow is really good, I don't know what's going to happen. So. Yeah, we're in a big mess. It should have been done on an election, I think. But.
Well, look, I mean, frankly, the whole thing should have been sorted out far more quickly, and the very fact she wants to push on for transition deals and everything else does play, I think, into the side of those with a different point of view. Connor, I mean, you know, you talk about Labour, but Labour have a problem here too, you know, because there's over 4 million people who voted Brexit and then voted for Corbyn. They're not going to be very happy at the direction he's taking them in, are they?
Well, that's why it makes it so confusing. Because now, if they have to go for election again, what are they going to say? Because they can't say what they said in their pamphlets last time. Because now that's not true. Now that's not the case. So the last year,
it is very confusing.
It's been a waste. Like it's just been
it is.
Wasting.
It's very, very confusing. It's very confusing, and the point about the referendum was it was supposed to be a good, simple message. Please get us out. They haven't done it. Connor, it's a mess. I think you're right in saying that. LBC's political editor, Theo Usherwood, is going to join us to talk about the Garden Bridge, because Boris has been back to City Hall today. Theo, good evening.
Very good evening to you, Nigel. Yes, Boris did a star turn in front of the Oversight Committee today at the London Assembly, Nigel, and the reason was that there is an investigation into a so-called missing £40 million of public money which has been lost. Another £10 million has been accounted for that's been spent on the Garden Bridge, but actually the Garden Bridge never materialised and now has vanished into thin air. Boris Johnson, of course, has been accused of signing off on the money early, of promoting the Garden Bridge against the interests of the taxpayer. And today he was summoned before Assembly members to give his side, his version of events.
It would have been a great thing for London. It would absolutely true that it's a bitter disappointment to me now that it is no longer proceeding. And in the interim, further cost was racked up of about £9 million, I believe. So, since the new mayor, since Sadiq Khan came in to office, a further £9 million was racked up during a period of sort of indecision. I mean, the worst thing you can do, really, with something like that is not make up your mind, be warm towards it one day, then listen to the sceptics the other day. To get anything done in London, you've got to push and really believe in it. If you ask me now to say who should the mayor be accountable for that expenditure? Yes, the mayor certainly should be accountable for that expenditure. Had I gone on, were I still mayor of London, I would certainly have continued with that project, and that would not have been money down the drain. Alas, for now it is, until such time, of course, as someone comes to the rescue of the project and revive it.
That's Boris Johnson there, wow. Nigel, laying the blame firmly at the door of Sadiq Khan, because of course Sadiq Khan asked Dame Margaret Hodge to hold a review into the management of the project and asked her to decide whether she thought the Garden Bridge should continue. She decided no, and then Sadiq Khan decided not to provide the guarantee that was necessary for the Garden Bridge to continue, and so the whole project had to be wound up last summer. And therefore it's all over.
Theo, I thought Brexit was a mess until I heard about the Garden Bridge. I cheered up considerably. Thank you very much indeed.
That's quite right.
That was Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor. I'm going to try and squeeze a couple more calls in on Tony Blair. Dominic is a brand new caller from Colchester. Good evening, Dominic.
Yeah, I'm going to hopefully give you an argument that will persuade you that a second referendum is a good idea. So we've already had a referendum about whether to leave or not, so I don't think we should rehash that. But at the end of all of this, the EU is going to have come up with some terms and conditions for us to leave on, and I think there should be a referendum of whether to accept those terms and conditions or whether to leave on World Trade Organization terms.
I'd love that. Well, I tell you what, if we have to have a second referendum, that's the right one, yes.
And game theory says that if we do that will strengthen our negotiations hand. So I just think it's sensible. I just think it would give us a much stronger negotiation and we'll get a much better deal. So that's what I think the second referendum should be for.
If we have to have a second referendum, and if Parliament accepted it on those terms, it would be great. Thank you. I'm going to go to Walter in Blackpool. Walter, you've got 30 seconds. We're at the end of the show. Welcome.
Welcome, Nigel. Yeah. All I wanted to say was that the EU has shown itself to be flexible in the past with exemptions such as Schengen, from the euro, etc. But as part of this variable geometry, what about the kind of customs union arrangement that Turkey has with the European Union? After all, it excludes agriculture, services, and public procurement.
Yeah, there are lots and lots of different options, Walter, but Turkey can't negotiate her own trade deals without doing it with the European Union. Walter, gotta go. I'm here in Blackpool, but in the next hour, we're going to talk about the fact that for months now, the European Union has been demanding that Theresa May spells out exactly the kind of relationship Britain wants with the bloc. Tomorrow, she will finally, I hope, deliver a speech following on from Lancaster House and Florence. She's going to tell us the government's approach to these negotiations. Please tell me, what do you want to hear from Mrs. May? And if you want to hear her getting tough, call me on 0345 6060 973. Thank you, Donald. Well, yesterday, of course, it was Monsieur Barnier speaking in Brussels, saying that Northern Ireland would have to stay part of the customs union, that the European Court of Justice would have to continue to have say over that province, and not just for the transition period, but actually in perpetuity, also saying that any EU migrants that come during the transition period would have full and permanent rights. And Mrs. May, responding yesterday, I mean, quite a tough way, really, talking about the constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom and saying that no British Prime Minister could sign up to these demands. Well, today, Donald Tusk, the former Polish Prime Minister, and now, of course, the man who is the European Council President, he's been in Downing Street today, and he's described himself as not happy with the meeting and Mrs. May's red lines. And this is interesting because we've had two very big speeches from Mrs. May. One, the Lancaster House speech, which took place at the start of last year, and then one later on that she made in Florence. And my feeling is that she's basically been putting out a series of mixed messages, because with the Lancaster House speech, which I praised on this show to the rafters, I never thought I'd hear a British Prime Minister using the exact words and phrases that I've been using for 20 years about what we're going to do, how we're going to break free, how we're going to go global. I thought it was terrific. And then a few months later in Florence, she basically said, we are leaving the European Union, but we think it's a really great thing, and we're going to opt back in to virtually all the parts of it, including justice and home affairs, science and technology, etc. And I think there have been some very mixed messages. We've seen some incredibly tough negotiating from the European Commission side, from Monsieur Barnier. You know, my feeling, I mean, why on earth you have to pay to leave a club is quite beyond me, when I'd have thought they probably owe us a few quid. But, you know, seemed to me that they were treating us almost like a hostage, saying, you know, we've got to pay a ransom, threatening us with future trade unless we meet their terms. I think she made a lot of concessions in that December deal before Christmas. I think many of those chickens came home to roost yesterday with what Monsieur Barnier said. But given where we are, she is going to make her third big public speech on Brexit tomorrow. And I want to know from you, what do you want her to say? What approach should she take? And if you think it's about time she stood up and said, we will simply not be treated like this, then call me on 0345 6060 973. Or maybe you think she's got no option because she simply hasn't got the numbers in Parliament. She's basically going to have to meet at least most of their demands. Then you can text to 84850, and any clear messages that you've got for our Prime Minister tomorrow, you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and we will, once again in this hour, keep you up to date with the weather news. It is a big event in this country. I think it's perhaps been slightly over-exaggerated by the media, but it is a major event, and we'll give you updated news, particularly what's happening in South Wales and the West Country, where Storm Emma is potentially going to dump over a foot of snow on many of those places. And of course, you can watch us on Facebook. I'm live here from Blackpool, where I'll be doing Question Time later against Ken Clarke. We couldn't have two more diametrically opposed opinions, but have to say, as a person, I've always really rather liked him, because he's stuck to his guns, he's consistent, and I have to say I rather prefer politicians like that than those that blow around in the breeze. Peter in Birmingham is a new caller to this show. What's Mrs May got to do tomorrow, Peter, to satisfy you?
Well, basically, she's got to turn around to them and say, look, behave or we walk, and we walk on WTO rules. All they're doing now is putting obstacles in the way. I think tomorrow's speech, when she gives it, will be full of the same usual waffle, the appeasing waffle. And I think it's now time to get top with him and say, look, behave or we go. Simple. You don't get any money. We go to WTO rules and you will be the losers. We might suffer a bit, but you will be the losers.
Do you think that she gives them... Does she give them, Peter, a month? Does she give them 3 months? Or does she say it's right here, right now?
I'd say give them 28 days to come to the negotiating table with something sensible and concrete, or we go.
Yep. Okay, no, I understand. Would there be, do you think, I mean, one thing Barnier did say yesterday, and one thing that Tusk repeated today, particularly on Northern Ireland, is if the Brits have got a better proposal, they should put it on the table. Do you think before we walk, and I do understand absolutely what you're saying, before we walk, do you think it's about time the British government actually put something down on the table and said clearly, categorically, unequivocally, this is what we want?
Yes, there is. And I think there is a case for that. They could declare that the island of Ireland as sort of like, you know, that these things exist in Europe and all over the world where they're called free ports, where where the customs arrangements are, either don't exist or whilst goods are in transit, they're not subject to any tariffs or anything like that. They could sort out an arrangement like that and also have electronic customs declaration. I mean, me and my wife deliver parcels for a courier company, and we get parcels from all over the world, and all that's on them is a simple declaration of what's inside that package.
Yeah. Oh, Peter, I see. The reason I asked you that is I think we should put on the table and quote back at them the European Parliament's own Constitutional Affairs Committee report, which made it perfectly clear that with technology, all of this stuff can be handled very easily. Peter, I'm with you. I think there comes a point where we have to walk, but I do think putting a firm counter down to what Barnier did yesterday is the right approach. I thank you. Irene has completely made her mind up. She says to me on Facebook, let's walk, for goodness sake. Enough is enough. We are being made a laughing stock. Actually, Irene, I was met with incomprehension in America last week, and I met some quite senior people out there last week who simply can't understand why we're allowing ourselves to be bossed around by unelected bureaucrats. I mean, just think of it. The British Prime Minister left Downing Street at 4 o'clock in the morning to go and see Monsieur Barnier, who's not been voted for and can't be removed. It is, I suggest, folks, all a little humiliating. James is calling from Manchester. Good evening, James.
Good evening, Nigel. And firstly, I'm looking very much forward to watching you with my arch enemy, Kenneth Clarke, on Question Time this evening. I've got you on timer. Yes, I've been waiting with bated breath for this speech from Theresa May since Monday. I totally agree with Peter. I was really hoping that she'd turn around and say, well, actually, I'm going to drop the bomb. We're walking away. But what I would like to hear from her tomorrow is that, a bit like what Peter said, you've got one of two options. You either accept what we're asking for, and I'll tell you why in a second, and you forget the Northern Ireland issue. I don't mean that in any disrespectful way, but what I mean is to either accept what we're asking, where we've been very reasonable, or we do go out on WTO rules. What I'm finding, Nigel, with this negotiation, I always thought that negotiations were two ways, and all I'm seeing from Theresa May is a lot of giving, but not an awful lot of getting back. And it's turning not from a negotiation, but into a complete surrender to the EU federal state.
Well, do you know what, James? I called that Christmas deal a great Brexit betrayal. I didn't know at the time how much Corbyn was going to do the same thing. But yeah, I think it is time. It's time, James, for her to get tough and to stop looking weak, isn't it?
Well, we've got to stop all that. I mean, I mentioned to somebody the other day. She keeps treating this as a personal relationship. If I go, you know, it's not, Nigel, it's a business relationship. If I go to Argos and buy a TV, I don't want the life story of the person selling me the TV and want them to be friends with me for the rest of my life. I want to go in and buy a TV, and that's the end of it. I don't want anything else from them. You know, she really needs to get an awful lot tougher, and I was absolutely disgusted with John Major's speech, who, for your listeners, probably aren't aware, that lecturing, he called the Brexiteers ultra-Brexiteers, which to me was a definition to the Russian football hooligans.
Well, I tell you what, James, it's a nicer word than he used against the Maastricht rebels back in the 1990s. He used the B word about them. James in Manchester, I do not think you are alone with your view. There are a lot of Brexiteers very frustrated by this Prime Minister. I'm going to go to David in Norwich. David, are you frustrated by Theresa May, or is she doing a fantastic job?
Good evening, Nigel. Frustrated isn't the word for it, mate. I personally think, and I know this is a fact, the bulk of the British people are so angry now. We are being put it politely, we're being shafted by the political system. We voted out, and the British people want out, but we're being treated as though we're complete and utter idiots. You know, the political elite are happy. You know, they think they've got rid of UKIP, for instance. Oh, well, because we want to do what we want to do, and, you know, we'll get rid of them. But, you know, people are now beginning to stand up en masse against this, Nigel, and you know that, and it's a fact. We're not going to suffer it.
Yeah, I mean, I get the impression, David, that the Brexiteers want something to happen. I also get the impression there's a significant percentage of people who voted Remain who say we've made a decision, for goodness sake, just get on with it. And the one thing Mrs May is not doing, she is not just getting on with it. She is, I think, being pushed around, David, by big businesses who've urged this transition period upon her in the hope, I think, that they think it can become permanent.
I think you're absolutely right, and I just think the bulk of the British people, Nigel, aren't going to suffer that. You know, for once in their life, they're going to stand up and say, no, we voted to leave, we believe what we want, and we want it. Don't do that to us.
You may be right, David, I thank you. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show exclusively on LBC. It's a big day for Mrs May. She's given out some very mixed messages over the course of the last year. She's looked to many of us on the Brexit side to be weak and giving too many concessions. And I think to almost all of us, why are we taking so long? Doesn't she actually believe in what she's doing? I don't know. Jack is going to answer that question for me. He's calling from Whitechapel in East London. He's a brand new caller to the show. Jack, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. Well, I'm not so much a Conservative, I'm a Thatcherite, and we need a leader with that kind of determination not to be bullied. And it's really frustrating from the outside looking in. Now, whether you voted for Remain or whether you voted to leave, I think we're all in this now together, and we need the country to get the best deal it can. And I think we're being bullied, and I don't like it. And I think most British people who
Jack, you sort of mentioned the word bullied. Do you feel we're being sort of humiliated a bit on the world stage?
Yeah, I think we are. I think we're trying to, and I think we want to probably maybe take it in a different direction. Say, look, hold on a minute. We are now going to move away. We are now going to go on world trade rules, but and I think then what we should say, right, we're going to start our own common market, and if anyone else wants to leave the EU, come and join us. Maybe have some British rules for trading around the world, and you can come and join us and get away from that as well. Because we're not the only people that want away from this, I think.
No. I think there are lots of other countries. In some ways, Jack, I think, you know, that'll take time. But what I do know is there are countries all over the world queuing up, wanting to sign deals with the United Kingdom.
You're saying about it taking time. I get that. But what I'm getting at is, we can both play dirty. Let's say, look, hold on a minute. Yes. If you're not going to play this straight with us, maybe we're going to take a different route and we'll walk away, and maybe we can canvass other people to say, look, actually, there is a future outside the EU, so just play it straight or else.
Yeah, no, Jack, I understand that, and I argued from the start they should bypass the bully boys of Brussels, go straight to the member state governments, and indeed go to the winemakers, the cheese makers, the chocolate makers, the car makers, and try and lobby support that way. And Jack, just tell me, have they, 'cause I've not been in London today, have they gritted the roads today?
There are some gritted, but I would say the pavements are the worst. Actually, what I do is I've got a delivery company, and we're sort of trying to deliver parcels to customers all the time, and it's been really tricky for bikes and bike couriers to do their job, and we're delivering stuff in vans right now. But it's been tricky, really tricky, and I hope they're going to re-grit tonight, because what we've got is the snow that's been on the ground has turned to ice, and the pavements haven't been good, and that's even in town in the Whitechapel area, Mile End, in those kind of areas.
Jack,
but you know what? I think the country's done its best with what we've got at the moment. You said earlier that everyone seems to be making a big deal about the weather, but, you know, across the country, if we're all helping each other, I think it's a good thing. And I think at the moment people are coming together. We're all being tolerant, flexible, and helping each other. And that's where we've got to be.
I hope you're right. That's the most positive thing anyone said this week. That's wonderful. Jack, tremendous. Ring again. He was a new caller, and that was great. Sadiq Khan, of course, was on LBC this morning, on with James O'Brien, getting a bit of a tough time, as I understand it, from quite a few callers, and he didn't go into great detail about gritters, etc. But our understanding is there are only 39 for the whole of the Transport for London area. And yeah, sure, you can't have hundreds of them because it doesn't snow very often. It's the first time since 2009, really, that snow has settled in London. But still a feeling from me, looking at those roads at 5:30 yesterday morning, frankly, that more should have been done. But back to Mrs. May and what she's going to say. And Hugh, another East London caller. Hugh's calling from Walthamstow, another new caller to the Nigel Farage Show on LBC. Good evening, Hugh.
Good evening to you, Nigel. I believe that you probably disagree with me at first when I make my point, but hear me out anyway.
I will.
We're not going to get a good deal, because if we do, then Italy's going to leave, and then who else? Other countries will want to leave if they give us a perfect deal. I believe that we can get a good deal, an excellent deal. We get our four freedoms, and we have complete full access to the free market, etc., sharing information, all of the things. But it is only one way. We need to make an offer that can't be refused, as Donald Trump might suggest. I think we should pay, Theresa May should go with a batch of post-dated cheques, and I hope you're sitting down here, all right, £120 billion payment, all right. I know you're going to disagree with this. Not at all. No, look.
I said I'd hear you out. I'm hearing you out, Hugh. I'm finding it difficult, but I'm hearing you out.
Okay. If we stay in the EU, is it 10 billion a year we're paying in?
Net, yeah.
Net, yeah. So that is, like, my idea is 12 years of payment, all up front. It would prevent any other country leaving, because they would also have to pay in a huge sum of money. We're one of the richest nations in the EU. And if we do that, we'll get all of our freedoms, everything we want, a great deal, which we're not going to get in any other way whatsoever. We can afford it.
So you think, Hugh... So Hugh, you're saying to me, if we bung them a huge sum of money, they'll give us a good deal.
But that would be the terms. They would have to give us, so everything stays exactly as it is, but absolutely free trade between all of the nations, between the EU and us, and we have our four freedoms. I knew you would disagree, but think hard about it.
Well, it wouldn't be worth it, Hugh. It wouldn't be worth it.
It would, because it would bring more investment for overseas when it's all settled, okay? If we leave, there will be certain disadvantages to us. But I'm not saying that it would be a cliff edge. That's absolute nonsense as well.
So what you're saying, Hugh, is we'd be able to negotiate our own global trade deals. We'd be able to do our own thing. We wouldn't be stuck inside customs unions. We would simply have a free trade deal with the European Union, but it would just cost us quite a bit of money.
Indeed, yes. Which we can.
All right. Well, do you know what?
And we would.
Do you know what?
We would pay. You disagree with me? Absolutely, I'm sure.
But I understand the point you're making. I don't think it would be worth it. But do you know what? This Prime Minister is getting to the point where she's being cornered. This Prime Minister is now in a very, very difficult position. And who's to say, Hugh? And, we heard it first here on LBC. She may take up your suggestion. I think it would be too big a price to pay. But hey, Hugh from Walthamstow, thank you for your call, because he offered a solution. You might agree with it or disagree with it, but I do think the Prime Minister needs to start, rather than responding to them the whole time, And we've been doing that right from the start. It's about time we now started to try to set the agenda. That's my feeling. I'm going to go to snowy Southend. Tim, a new caller to the show. Good evening, Tim. Tim, can I hear you? Nope. I'm struggling with Tim. Tim, try and come back to us. I'll go to Toby and Clapham. Toby, good evening.
Hi, Nigel. How are you?
I'm okay. So is Mrs May going to move this forwards tomorrow, or will it be another speech full of platitudes and mixed messages?
Oh, no, she's going to move it forward, I think. Now, I might end up eating my words, but...
Right.
But I do...
Well, we all have to do that sometimes, Toby.
Yeah, we do. But I genuinely think she's actually been playing it the right way. I know there's been lots of frustration from callers and yourself over her term of office. But sure. I actually think she's played it really well. She's she takes every little bit step by step. She allows all of the sort of arch remainers and the people that are trying to oppose Brexit to eat up all the oxygen for a while she's considering. And then she comes through at the end and does something. She did it just before Christmas to get the end of the first stage. I think she's doing okay. Tomorrow will be a defining point I don't disagree with, but I think she's played it reasonably well so far.
But Toby, what she agreed to in December was a total giveaway. It was a surrender to all of the demands that were being made of her.
To a point, yes, I agree with you. But there is going to have to be some... We can't... I know that there's a lot of kind of we just shut the doors and walk away attitudes, and I'm a Brexiteer, so... But there is going to have to be some compromise if we're going to get some kind of good deal at the end of it.
Okay. Do you think, Toby, she is explaining herself to either the European Commission negotiators or the people of this country in a way that is clear enough?
No.
Fine.
Definitely not.
No. Well, do you know what? That actually, above all, is what she could do tomorrow.
Yes,
to say, this is it. This is it. We are going to put counter proposals down to what we were given the other day, and these are going to be our final offer. If they don't like it, when I said once before that no deal was better than a bad deal, I know you didn't believe me. Well, you know what? You've got 3 months to sort this out. Now, if she started to talk like that, Toby, we'd all know where we stood, wouldn't we?
Don't you think she's already done that slightly this week already? She did it in PMQs when she was referring to the counting. She said that offer is not acceptable. I mean,
I know,
there is
Toby,
a little bit of that coming through, don't you think?
Well, maybe, but I mean, actually, what she said there were the chickens coming home to roost from a December agreement. But Toby, look, what she said this week was better. She's in a corner. She's in a really tough place. Maybe, just maybe, she'll come out tomorrow and absolutely surprise all of us. And Toby, thank you for your call. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show. It's Theresa May's big speech tomorrow. We've heard it all before, Lancaster House, and then we heard a different message, of course, when she was in Florence at Christmas. I called her Theresa the Appeaser for giving in to too many demands, but she's got a chance tomorrow to dispel all of this, to be tough, to stand up for Britain, and to put a deal down on the table that the others would agree to, and if they don't, she'll say we're going to walk away. At least that's what I would like to think is going to happen. I don't know whether it will. But the weather continues to dominate conversations in this country. And joining me now is legendary weatherman John Ketley. Good evening, John.
Yeah, good evening, Nigel. And I'm not changing my story. Mine's in stone.
Well,
this story's been set in stone all week, so I'm not going to change now.
I mean, isn't it funny? This warning about the beast from the east. I mean, how much warning were we given? About 10 days, John, was it, or more?
Well, it probably was a little bit less than that, but it was well set, and it's not something you would have allowed, of course. You would never have allowed something to come in from Eastern Europe, would you, like this? But
well, I mean, I'd have been cautious about it.
Yeah,
I'd have wanted to vet it, clearly. Yeah. But I mean, but we now have this other pressure system coming up from the south, which is Storm Emma. So tell us what's going to happen in the next 48 hours, John.
Well, the thing is that this cold air is so deep-seated now across the UK, and there's been so much evidence, Nigel, over the last 72 hours of exactly how bad it can be, because the evidence is on the floor to see it. It's meeting this milder air coming in from Bay of Biscay. It's off Portugal a couple of days ago, and it's now off northwest France. So there's evidence there to suggest that the mild air meeting the very, very cold air is going to produce lots and lots of heavy snow. There's no argument about that. The red warning, I think, is perfectly justified. We've seen these situations in the past, but they weren't called red warnings if you go back pre-2010. They've just changed the scenario of things, really, over the recent years. But the evidence is there. The dynamics are right. There will be heavy snowfall, and of course it's being driven on by these strong winds as well. A bitter wind which will cause huge drifts up against the walls, against Dartmoor and Bodmin and Exmoor, all these sort of places, up into the Brecon Beacons. So I think it's absolutely solid that this story is true to occur overnight tonight, and there'll still be further sleet and snow affecting other parts of the country as it moves northwards tomorrow, but it's a weaker affair. At the same time, though, eventually we are going to see less cold air coming in behind it during the weekend, so we'll all see an improvement as we go through Saturday and Sunday.
So for those that want to go out tobogganing or skiing or whatever it is, Saturday's the last day, realistically, is it?
Well, the further north you are, the longer it's going to last, and it'll be well into Monday, I would think, before we lose most of the snow showers over eastern Scotland. But having said all that, the cold weather is never going to be too far away. It could well reappear later on next week, but nothing as severe as it is just at the moment. The temperatures last couple of days haven't risen above freezing in most of the country.
Now, the older folk talk about the winter of 1947 and, of course, the winter of 1963.
Yeah.
How does this rate? I mean, this is fairly minor, isn't it, in historical terms?
Yeah, well, this is minor in the sense that it's just lasting a week and a bit, and then it moves away again. It's hugely modified by the beginning of next week. So 63, I lived through 63, couldn't play football in the playground for 10 weeks. That was a nightmare for me, Nigel, I can tell you. But more recently, and people will remember much more recently, in 2010, we had heavy snowfall through much of December. It really was very severe. There was a foot of snow in many parts of the country, and there was that famous satellite picture showing white fields across the whole of Britain on the satellite picture. Everybody got snow in December 2010. So this is a bit of a blip. It's a very severe blip, but it isn't going to last too long.
No. John Ketley, thank you very much indeed. John Ketley there explaining that whilst there, I mean, it could be huge amounts of snow in the West Country and Wales in historical terms, it isn't that big because it isn't going to last that long. At least let's hope that's the case. Just want to let you know, tonight it's the Global Awards celebrating stars of music, news and entertainment. And LBC is going to be covering all of that because LBC is part of the Global Radio Group. Star-studded ceremonies. It's all available at lbc.co.uk and you can watch it live or later on today anytime you like. Now, I was having a try earlier to speak to snowy Southend and Tim, a new caller who lives there, and we were having a few problems. Tim, is the line working now?
Hello, Nigel. Can you hear me?
I can.
Good, the gremlins are through. Just to say, delighted to talk to you. Think you've done a fantastic job to get us to this point. But the reason for calling was that when this process started after the referendum, I thought about things from the EU side and the politics from the EU perspective, which was they would have to show or demonstrate to the rest of the EU that they were inflicting pain on the UK, and that for us to get a deal, it would cost us money, which kind of echoes an earlier caller. And I didn't mind either of those, and for those kind of Remain voters that firmly believe in federalism, I've got no big deal with that. I think if that's what they believe, that's fine. But in order to get a deal, if we were going to negotiate and try and get a good deal for Britain, we would have to show, our leaders would have to show to the EU that we genuinely believe that we would go alone if we had to with WTO rules for trade, for instance. So
yes, because that's the negotiation, Tim, isn't it? That unless there's in any negotiation, unless there's the threat that the other side might walk away, then there's not much incentive for the others, is there?
That's right, and I always felt that given the history of the EU and the negotiation with Greece and the finance minister from Greece, he wrote a book about that and issued the warnings to us about what process we were going to be subjected to, which he's been proved to be absolutely accurate with. It was going to require courage from our leaders and true leadership, and that requires courage. And I was willing to give Theresa May and the government sort of some leeway, given the politics involved. But when the December deal was done, I struggled to see what we'd achieved from that first year or whatever of negotiations, and then kind of thought, well, I'm worried now that we're beginning to betray democracy in this country. And as a consequence,
yes.
Much to my daughter's hilarity, I wrote a very stiff letter to the chairman of the Conservative Party, Theresa May, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, and copied your assistant in as a protest to the Conservative Party that I felt they were actually in danger of betraying democracy in the UK, which would be the first time, I think, that I'd seen such a thing happen, because people were subjected in the referendum to a lot of fear. And for people on low incomes with families to be told that if you voted leave, you'd put your job at risk, I thought was pretty rough. And for those people to then go and vote leave, I thought showed tremendous courage. And that's what this government needs to show. And it needs to show it right now.
Do you reckon she'll do it, Tim?
I doubt. I struggle to see that she has the car. I think she's very nice, but I think she is committed to herself to getting a deal at any price, because I think she feels, A, that might get through Parliament, and B, it will save her career as Prime Minister of this country. Yeah. And I think she'll sell us down a bit to some extent.
She's constantly scared, Tim, of the parliamentary numbers, and I understand why. But you know what? If she did some of those things tomorrow that you want to see and that millions want to see, my guess is she'd take the country with her. Tim, I thank you very much indeed for your call. Jeanette says on Facebook, been waiting for May to put her plan on the table, but she's too devious, worries me. Peter said, good caller, Jack, but Labour and Conservatives are needed to gang up on the EU. Well, Labour are going in the opposite direction. They're not going to help the Tories and gang up on the EU. It isn't going to happen. And another Peter suggests, Nigel, her hands are tied. She's got too many turncoats in her party. Peter, that is, and I just repeat this point, that while she's got huge problems with a split cabinet, Remainers to the left of her, Remainers to the right of her, and difficulty on the backbenches, including, of course, Kenneth Clarke, who I'm going to be with on Question Time later on this evening, it may be difficult in Parliament, but it's a funny thing. If a leader does something decisive and carries the country with them, suddenly a lot of MPs who were going to rebel suddenly think, oh, perhaps I better not do that. Ian is calling from Morecambe. He's a new caller to the show. Ian, good evening.
Oh, good evening to you. I've always wanted to speak to you, and I'm glad to have the privilege to do so. So thank you very much for having the opportunity. But firstly, I would say, if you don't get a knighthood, we'll go on to the very quickly. I won't waste much time. If you don't get a knighthood, I'll be very, very upset, because you will change the course of the British history and constitution that we have. That's for sure. Like Oliver Cromwell did. He did, didn't he? He changed history.
Well, Ian, that's kind of you. That's kind of you. But let's.
My point is.
Let's crack on from that. Yeah.
Let's crack on from that. Let's give our Prime Minister just a little bit of space. I'm right on your side. I'm right understanding where you're coming from. But she's in such a tight position at the moment, and it's not very easy for her. And she's not a lady that makes decisions quickly. She sits back. So people call her a ditherer. But I think she deserves a little bit more than that. And she's got 40 billion in the tank when it comes to the things that she's given way on, or seems to have given way on, which could be well negotiated back, given that Barnier thinks that it's going to be a hard border only. I mean, that's just not really going to be the case.
Well, Ian, David Davis said, unless we get a deal, they don't get the money. I'd like to hear the Prime Minister say that tomorrow, and to be clearer. And whilst you do argue she's in a tight spot, and you're absolutely right.
She's in a tight spot.
No, absolutely. I'm not disagreeing with that. But the trouble about giving her more time, Ian, is that time is running out. There is a major summit in Brussels on March the 22nd. There is a deadline for these trade talks of October. She's actually got to crack on. But Ian, I thank you for that very balanced view and that very kind call. You're listening to The Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on OBC. Well, tomorrow, it's a big day for the Prime Minister. She sent some mixed messages. Of that, there's no question. She made some pretty big concessions before Christmas and paid a price for it with Monsieur Barnier yesterday. I want her to be up there with a big plan tomorrow. I want it to be unequivocal and clear. They have to understand that she's prepared to walk away from all of this if we don't get something a bit more reasonable than Monsieur Barnier put on the table tomorrow. By text I get, if she dithers tomorrow and there's no clear message, then she is finished. I live in hope, but the EU is holding onto, hoping for a last-minute offer. We need to respond by preparing for no deal. The EU have prepared, we haven't, says Dee. Oh, Dee, I hope they have prepared in Downing Street for a no deal. But I really worry that you might be right. Liz is calling from Stoke-on-Trent. Good evening, Liz.
Hello, Mr. Farage. What I want to say is that, well, I agree with everything you've just said. Now, when every time she suggests an option, they say, oh, no. And she can't get beyond that. But that's because they're stringing her along, I believe. Because if there were rules that they say, you know, that's a rule, you can't do that. If there were rules, they'd be written down and they would be presented as, you know, a fait accompli, right. If you're going to leave the EU, this is what you have to abide by. But that doesn't exist. There aren't any clauses that exist to keep sending her away with no, with no satisfaction, because they're making it up as they go along, because it's never been done before. Nobody has left before.
That's true. That's true, Liz, but I do think Monsieur Barnier did put on the table a pretty comprehensive 120-page document yesterday. And I just wonder, I mean, it could be, Liz, that the British government are playing a very clever game. It could be.
You bet your life they are. They've got a lot to lose, because if she wins, if she gets what she wants, that's an open gate for everybody else. She needs to hold fast and bite the bullet and really call their bluff, because they won't know what's hit them. Because she's been intimidated. Liz, she's been presented with a no all the time.
Liz, I think that message that she needs to call their bluff is the clearest message I've had from any caller this evening. I thank you. Liz from Stoke-on-Trent, call their bluff. You know, unless we get X, Y, and Z, we're off. We're out of here. It's WTO, and it's you people, and it's the jobs in Europe that'll be lost. It'll be far worse for you than it will be for us. Nigel, Theresa should copy John Wayne in True Grit and throw a load of salt on the EU cowboys. Pity Sadiq Khan didn't think about that for London's roads yesterday morning. Let's go to Frederick in Golders Green. Good evening, Frederick.
Good evening, Nigel. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm, like all of us, waiting to see which Theresa May we get tomorrow, because I'm just not sure where we are with all of this. She did look a bit tougher yesterday in the House of Commons, so maybe that's the clue for how she's going to be tomorrow.
No, see, my view is very simple. There's only one thing Theresa May can do tomorrow, and that is to say to the EU that we are going to go out on WTO rules. That is the only option available to the UK. For them to give us a good deal will be for them to commit the European Union to destroy, which they wouldn't. Therefore, that is what she has to put forward. It most likely would bring down her government. But then, I say to the working class voters in the north, vote in a conservative government based on the New Deal, and you will get hard Brexit. I said to the 17.5 million voters, vote in a conservative government that has promised you complete WTO rules out of the European Union, out of the common market, out of the Court of Justice, complete sovereignty and control, and you will get that. To the Labour voters or the Remain voters like me, we have a choice. Common custom union with Labour. That is the choice in this situation. There is no middle ground. There is no good deal to be had.
No. Okay. No, I think, Frederick, I mean, in a way, as you say, you know, what terrifies Barnier and what terrifies Juncker is that if we're seen to have got out on the terms that we want, how many other countries would join that queue? And that does scare them, doesn't it?
Yes, but you will break up the European Union, and it will cost Germany far more than it will cost them in losing trade to the UK. That is the reality. That is why I voted Remain, because I knew the price was high. But we've made a choice. We have to live by it. There's no more dancing around and trying to straddle two walls. It is crunch time, and our government has to make a choice and sell it to the people, and we'll have to buy it or
Frederick, it's a clear message. Theresa May, Frederick and Golders Green says no more dancing around. Get on with it. Thank you. Great call. And interesting, isn't it? You know, there was Frederick. He voted Remain. He was sceptical that we'd manage to negotiate a good deal. But he's now saying, we've made a decision. Let's get on with it. Let's do it. Your big chance, your big day tomorrow, Mrs. May. Peter is calling from Chelmsford. Good evening, Peter.
Hello, Nigel. Yeah, I'm struck by the silence of all the businesses in Europe that stand to lose. They have terrific markets here. And their silence with the EU playing games with their future. I really can't understand it. And on your point, which is made about why would they treat us different and other people may want to leave, other people haven't got a massive market for a start off. I think that if we were to get tough with them instead of being on the back foot all the time and say, okay, we may go to world trade rules, yeah, we may leave the customs union, okay, we'll agree to that. What that will mean for the EU is that also won't be paying into your club anymore, so that 43 billion will not take place. And the other thing is, we have a deficit, you have a deficit against us, so that means you'll be sending us money every year. So we can then spend that on subsidising our businesses. And also, anybody in our country that's losing and having to pay through extra tariffs, we can compensate them out of the money that the EU owe us. And
yeah, that argument is logical. Prices would be a bit higher with EU goods, but they could be a lot cheaper for other goods coming in from the rest of the world if we chose to do that. And we could do that because the common external tariff makes a lot of everyday items a lot more expensive than they should be. Your point, Peter, about why are businesses in Europe being so quiet? They're scared. They're scared of speaking out against the European Commission, against the political class in their countries. But I said well over a year ago that I felt the government should be out there. There should be task forces organised by the government of businessmen and women, not politicians, businessmen and women, going around Europe and encouraging and helping some of those businesses, those French wine producers and champagne producers, the Belgian chocolate makers and whatever it is. We should have been going out there on big missions, having photographs of all these business groups together and getting the narrative out, because it's really interesting. Peter, I meet people from all nationalities in the European Parliament and all political shades of opinion who come up to me and say, there are firms in my constituency, in my region, really worried about this. We could have done so much more, couldn't we?
And with their unemployment, they can't afford to lose our business in Europe at the moment. They just cannot afford it because there's so much unemployment amongst the youth out there. And we joined a common market. It's like getting on an aeroplane to go somewhere, and then it gets hijacked and taken somewhere else by the people up the front who've got a political agenda, nothing to do with,
I think for many in this country over the age of 60, that is the primary source of their anger, that this was all sold to them as a common market, not as a political union, and kind of in the intervening years, no one asked their opinion. Peter from Chelmsford, I thank you very much indeed. Martin from Rotherhithe says, I quite like the PM to start with, but as these talks have gone on, I'm starting to think she's a bit soppy. She lacks what most of us Brits have plenty of, backbone. If she can't get a deal, then we should just walk away. Martin, I think that's the way an increasing number of us are feeling. Although that view is not shared by Mr. Blair, not shared by Sir John Major, not shared by Vince Cable and many others in our establishment. But it's shared by a lot of people who listen and participate on this show, plus all the other views too. You've been listening to the Nigel Farage Show.